What's up, welcome back to Nostalgia. Dave here with my top 10 albums of 2025. Gonna go through these albums 10 to 1, as well as some honorable mentions at the end. Almost all of these albums I reviewed when they released, so for a longer discussion on any of these albums, of course, make sure you go back and check those out. Gonna try and keep it a little bit brief here as we go through the 10 albums, plus those honorable mentions. Also to follow is my top 10 songs of the year. Any artists that I have on my album list will not be on my songs list and vice versa, so make sure you check out those lists as well. In addition to my top 10 songs list, I also have my top 10 K-pop songs list, which also does not have any overlap. So 3 music top 10 lists to celebrate the year in music in 2025. And let's get into it. So coming in at number 10, I have Star from To Hollis. This is an album that I actually didn't review. I listened to this a little bit later in the year when it came out back in April. And to me, To Hollis is probably the best distillation of this really new kind of internet pop sound that has been developing with new Gen Z artists. He has a lot of contemporaries here, but I think To Hollis, his sound is the most interesting to me. Maybe it's the most refined. It's maybe not the most like coarse and edgy. It's certainly gotten a little bit more poppier as he's built up to this official like debut album here. But I think it's pretty cool. There's certainly some cringier lyrics, some certainly young leaning Gen Z type lyrics that are fun. But it comes across to me as pretty genuine, and I enjoy the production on this. I think of songs like Nice or Nerve that really grab me with kind of an honesty to the lyrics, but also just a fun electronic, pop nature to how these songs bounce around. So I'm expecting To Hollis to, continue to rise in fame, honestly. We just saw him at the Marty Supreme after party in New York City. I don't think that's a coincidence. Coming in at number 9 for me is Eusexua from FKA Twigs. I really enjoy FKA Twigs' music. Now, Eusexua wasn't quite as strong as her last work. It did not have a song I liked nearly as much as, say, Tears in the Club from a few years back on that Capri Songs mixtape. But I continue to really respect what she does as being not similar to Hollis, but I guess genre-wise you could maybe loop them into similar places. She makes this very alternative avant-garde style pop. It's definitely hard to pin down. I think her vocals sometimes can be super ethereal, and maybe that goes a step too far. But Eusexua to me still really felt like a pretty cohesive listen, and it's just unlike just about anything that you usually will hear in the year. And I think even a quote lesser work from Twigs is still pretty substantial. That's why I still have it here on my list. And to her credit, she ended up making like a sequel companion album to this Eusexua Afterglow that started as a deluxe, but ended up being so creatively inspired that she really treated it as the follow-up record. So shout out Twigs, still really big fan of hers. And I thought my favorite song from this had to be Childlike Things, with its completely out of nowhere feature from Northwest, aka the daughter of Kim Kardashian and Kanye. That song I think is really fun. I love the energy of that one. Number 8 for me is Mayhem from Lady Gaga. I know, coming into the year, once we knew Gaga was releasing a new album, I was probably expecting to have Mayhem a bit higher on my list than it ended up being. I think it's a strong record. It just didn't have as much revisability as I was necessarily expecting. That being said, Abracadabra as a, kind of facsimile of Gaga's greatest hits, a la Bad Romance, I think that really works for what it's going for. I think Mayhem, this was kind of a back to the basics record for Lady Gaga in terms of what she's doing vocally, the type of song structures, the type of production on that album. And maybe that was not quite as ambitious for some of her fans. But for me, taking this for what it was, I thought it was still pretty high quality, and I enjoyed it. I just didn't revisit it nearly as much as I expected in the end. Number 7 for me is Tyler, the Creator's Don't Tap the Glass. This was quite the delight and quite the surprise when this released in the summer. Of course, Tyler had only just given us Chromacopia in the fall of 2024, and to get something so different than Chromacopia in such a short amount of time later, I think was pretty exciting. Chromacopia was super conceptual, super dense lyrically, Tyler imbuing once again another persona on the mic there. And that certainly had its merits and had some quality to it for sure. It made my top 10 last year. But I actually like Don't Tap the Glass a lot more than Chromacopia, because I think the lightness, the looseness of this, which is really more of a mixtape vibe than a traditional album, really lends itself to just Tyler's sensibilities as this really amusing and charming, enigmatic figure. And, think of the virality that followed Sugar on My Tongue, right? That could apply to most of the songs on this tape. I think it's just a really fun, upbeat, jubilant listen, and really gets to, I think, kind of like the core to me appeal of Tyler. I've not always loved his super introspective, dense journeys that he's gone down in the past, depending on the album. But this, for me, is just kind of like the perfect evolution of what kind of artist Tyler's become as he's become so multifaceted and so multi-genre. So shout out Tyler for Don't Tap the Glass. Number 6 for me is Virgin from Lorde. This is another album that I maybe wasn't necessarily expecting to be quite as high going in, just because we were coming off the lull that was Solar Power, Lorde's previous record. But thankfully, Virgin was able to really kind of correct the heading of the ship here and get Lorde back on course. I think the album is quite strong, has some of her deepest and most personal storytelling and songwriting about her own journey, which really grabbed me. And then I think the song What Was That really takes the mantle of like the next great like Lorde anthem. I think that song's tremendous. Well, I don't think Lorde has gotten back to the amazing, perhaps unreachable heights of melodrama. Of course, one of my favorite albums of last decade. Virgin, to me, I think, still really strong record, really speaks to why Lorde is a compelling pop figure, and also why she's pretty unique as a pop force as well. So I was really happy with how this one turned out, and disappointed that it ended up getting completely blanked by the Grammys, which was a surprise to me. Number 5 for me is Ruby from Jennie. I never expected to love this album as much as I did. I was certainly anticipating it, but this is the first time a K-pop album has actually made my top 10 albums of the year. And now, Jennie's Ruby, it certainly has a lot of Western influence. It's almost exclusively in English, so it's not a pure K-pop album by any means. But of course, Jennie's origins and still status as one of the faces of Blackpink, the biggest girl group in the world, certainly speaks to, I think, the increasing globalization of K-pop music, which we saw elsewhere this year with the success of K-pop Demon Hunters. Ruby, though, really knocked me out and really established itself as the clear strongest of the Blackpink solo albums that came out, in Q1 of this year, because Ruby's a Rihanna album. And I think it's amazing that Jennie was able to really pull something like that off, right? There's just so many moments, so many choices on this album that really resonated with me, whether it's a high-end energy banger like Jennie, whether it's, I think, really capable rap flow and melody on Extra, particularly in the beginning during Jennie's part before Doechii comes in. Really catchy kind of throwback hip hop bona fides with the IE way up. Absolutely love that song. Use it for a Instagram reel earlier this year, which I'm really proud of. The second single, Zen, actually made my top 10 K-pop songs of the year. I think that was the most impressive visually because it was such an ambitious music video, but also I think sonically really the clearest evocation of Rihanna's sound, Rihanna's vocal delivery on that song. I think it's an album that really exceeded my expectations, and I think really said a lot about Jennie's artistry. So really happy with Ruby. I went back to so many of those songs. Number 4 for me is Central C's Can't Rush Greatness. I believe this is Central C's second album, technically, third or fourth when you count the mixtapes. But man, this was one of the first albums, I heard this year. It came out in January, and man, I love this record. I thought this was a complete success. So many songs that I went back to throughout the year. Central C continuing to make good on the promise of him as this really unexpected bridge between UK hip hop and American pop stardom. He's by far the most established UK rapper in the history of American music, and that continues to be the case. And he had a ton of great stuff on this, right? Whether it's CBG with Dave, a fucking banger duet, Try Me with Skepta. There's also a lot of kind of growth songwriting wise with the more introspective stuff like Truth and the Lies featuring Lil Durk or Must Be. I think Sench, he has a certain way about how he raps. There's a certain charisma and style to him. I think you could probably compare his lyrical style to 21 Savage in many regards. But I think it just continues to really work for him. Tons of great songs I liked, including GBP featuring 21 Savage. Of course, Band for Band featuring Little Baby was one of the big singles, and that's a massive record at this point. I just really enjoy Sench. I think he's just really exciting and continue to really press smash play every time he puts anything out. So yeah, shout out Essential C. He was my favorite UK hip hop album of the year, of course. I really enjoyed AJ Tracy's work as well. Dave did another, great songwriting feat on his album as well, but the Sench album was kind of the clear best thing for me. Number 3 for me is Lux from Rosalía. I think this Rosalía album, God, it's so hard to talk about because there's so much to it. I did a pretty long review on this album and all the facets of it, the multilingual approach from Rosalía herself, the various genre influences that are here, the saintly concept, structuring the album. Rosalía has been one of the most significant figures in pop for several years at this point. Of course, think about Motomami, her previous album, and how landmark that was and what that represented. And she's flipped that on its head for the second time, right? Motomami was such a step forward and subversion from what she had previously done with her native flamenco music in her early work. And then Motomami's, rush towards shaking up the pop paradigm was now replaced once again with what Lux is doing, which genre-wise is quite different. I think the sampling, the orchestral flair, that the variety, song to song, moment to moment, there's so much here to really sit with and process. And I think it was just one of those purely cinematic listening experiences when you sit down and really listen to it album as track to track. So it was a lock to make the list as soon as I heard it. Please check my review out for more, just because it's an album that there's a lot to say on it. But and please let me know what you thought of Lux, because I think it's an album that really inspires a lot of discussion. Number 2 for me is Fancy That by PinkPantheress. I believe this was my most played album of the year because Pink was my number 1 artist on Spotify this year. But man, for a 30-minute dance record, I couldn't ask for anything more. I love every single song on this album. I've listened to all of them constantly. I think PinkPantheress as a club performer is just kind of note perfect at this point. She knows exactly what her sound is. There's so much great stuff here. So many really fun, high energy moments, but the songs never get dull. They never get boring tempo wise. Pink's delivery, the sampling when you do hear it, the background vocals when you do get them. There's just so much to enjoy with this album. And for something that's so seemingly brief, right? It's like a 30-minute record. I went back and listened to this constantly. I listened to this back to front constantly. Talk about an album that's amazing in the car. I love this record. Been a big fan of Pink. I had her last album in my top 10 that year too. I think she's great. And I think her kind of subversion and finding her place within pop as one of the, more exciting, Gen Z faces in pop has, I think, been pretty established at this point. Even though she's not the most mainstream person yet, which is a bit surprising to me given how successful and massive songs like Pain have become. But I think to me, this was just further confirmation of just why she's so exciting, but also kind of a one of one right now. And of course, Pink would have been my number 1 album of the year quite easily if it wasn't for my actual number 1 album of the year, which of course is Let God Sort 'Em Out by Clips. Pusha T, Malice, absolutely crushed with this record that I went back to all the time. I'm not sure what it says about the year in rap, which I thought was pretty thin and pretty quiet overall, but what does it say that by far the most exciting album that came out this year was from 2 guys in their 50s, But I thought Push and Malice absolutely delivered in every respect with Let God Sort 'Em Out. And there's just a handful of song runs that just are undeniable from them. So Be It, followed by lead single Ace Trumpets, All Things Considered, MTB, TTF, EBITDA, and then FICO. God damn, you're gonna melt your phone. You're gonna go deaf. That's just an untouchable run. And I think these are just incredible bangers. I love the production. My favorite song on this album has changed so many times, right? And I was lucky enough to see the group perform live earlier this year, and the energy in the room, the excitement people had to see Clips in 2025 was really palpable. And I think it really speaks to how well received this album has been. Of course, the promo run for that album, very well established how well that went, right? And it's not that it's just pure Coke talk either. Clips really gets into losing their parents on a song like The Birds Don't Sing. I think there's plenty of great storytelling here, but I think my favorite song has kind of settled on FICO. I think just verse to verse, the way Mouse pops in, just the double entendres, the way they can put words together and rap about familiar themes and still be really exciting in the process. I mean, there was really nothing better for me this year than Clips Let God Sort 'Em Out. So we'll get into my honorable mentions in just a second, but first, to recap, here are my top 10 albums of 2025. Number 10, Star from 2 Hollis. Number 9, Eusexua from FKA Twigs. Number 8, Mayhem by Lady Gaga. Number 7, Tyler the Creator's Don't Tap the Glass. Number 6 for me is Virgin from Lorde. Number 5 for me is Ruby from Jennie. Number 4 for me is Central C's Can't Rush Greatness. Number 3, Lux from Rosalía. Number 2, Fancy That from PinkPantheress. And number 1, my favorite album of 2025, Let God Sort 'Em Out by Clips. Let me know what your favorite albums were of the year. And as for my honorable mentions, of course, I already mentioned the AJ Tracey album, which I like quite a bit. I think the late-breaking Nas and DJ Premier album from this December, just last week, was quite tremendous as well. Little Sims, another good record from her. I gotta give Addison Rae some love for certainly exceeding expectations with that debut record. In terms of most disappointing, I had a few that jumped out to me. The Underachievers, big fan of them, rap duo out of New York, really did not have the energy level I was expecting. I felt that was pretty underwhelming from them. Tate McRae, her album, I thought was completely flat and uninteresting. And then Jackson Wang's Magic Man 2, I thought was a pure disappointment compared to the greatness of the first Magic Man. Like, this did not compare in the slightest. I thought it was quite poor. But let me know, what are your favorite albums of the year? What were your honorable mentions? What were you disappointed by? What jumped out to you? What did I leave off? Let me know. And make sure you come back for my top 10 songs and top 10 K-pop songs of the year as well. And I'll see you next time.